This week, a friend of mine posted a diagram on my Facebook wall. It was a semi-serious timeline of the creative process, from the first moment of the project to the final deadline. At the beginning of the timeline, there was a little mark showing the moment where the project begins, and then there was a huge, long stretch of the timeline, maybe 90% of it, devoted to the first stage of the process, procrastination. According to the diagram, procrastination is by far the most time-consuming part of the process. It's a complicated activity involving snacking, naps, boredom, denial, guilt, shame, and the internet. It takes days, weeks, maybe even months or years to finish procrastinating. There are just so many pictures of baby animals to look at, and so many important things to do, like folding all your socks that have nothing to do with the task at hand. According to the diagram, after you spent 90% of your time procrastinating, you are then ready to enter the next stage of the creative process, panic. Panic is a little like procrastination, but it's even less pleasant. It involves guilt and shame, but it also involves jitters, insomnia, stomach aches, headaches, and crazy amounts of caffeine. At this stage in the process, you proceed to spend a lot of your remaining time freaking out. You don't see how you'll ever get done in time. Everything seems impossible, and you're so afraid of failure that you don't even try. And then, after you panicked enough, when you've arrived at the last days or hours or minutes before the deadline, you are ready to enter the final stage of the creative process, doing all the work while crying. The last stage is pretty self-explanatory. It's complete misery. But then the deadline arrives, and you either make it or you don't, and it's finally all over. That is, until you take on another project and it starts all over again. Does this process sound familiar to you? Do you sometimes feel disconnected from your work and stuck in unproductive patterns of anxiety and fear? Does your life feel too rushed, too slow, too lazy, or too crazy? Unfortunately, this chaotic process is very familiar to me, and according to Facebook and to many conversations I've had over the years with friends and students, it's familiar to many others as well. Many of us are pretty productive and high-functioning people, and there are definitely days when we budget our time wisely and maintain a positive attitude and calmly proceed to get things done. But sometimes we don't. Some days our life feels like a long series of impossible deadlines and demands stretching behind us and before us as far as we can see. We forget why we're doing what we're doing. We feel worn down by countless commitments, and we feel too far behind to ever catch up. And some days I feel like I'm living through all the stages of the process at once. Procrastinating at breakfast, panicking at lunch, crying and working from dinner till dawn. It's a vicious cycle that a lot of us fall into, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this way of life isn't God's will for anyone. And if you're like me, you might be looking for a way out. But luckily for us, God has provided a means of escape. My sermon today is about two things I spend a lot of time thinking about in my work as a teacher and writer: deadlines and extensions. Or to put it another way, it's about deadlines and lifelines. Deadlines are the ultimatums that give us a sense of urgency. And lifelines are the means of grace that give us a sense of possibility and hope. And in order to live the fruitful life that God wants us to, we need both. People procrastinate and panic for different reasons. Sometimes they procrastinate because they lack a sense of urgency. They doubt the importance of what they're doing. Their goal seems irrelevant or impossibly far away. They lose their belief in their work. They forget their overall purpose. Nothing seems to matter that much. But people also procrastinate and panic because they have too much of a sense of urgency. The stakes seem so high. The consequences of failure seem so dire, and their own abilities seem so terribly limited. They're afraid they don't have what it takes to do what they need to do, and their fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. In the New Testament readings today, Jesus and the Apostle Paul give us two similar stories about deadlines and lifelines. These stories are written to help us break the cycle of fruitlessness and despair. Paul and Jesus come at the problem from two angles in order to deal with both of the major root problems of fruitless behavior: our worry that our work doesn't really matter, and our worry that we can't do it and it's already too late. Both Paul and Jesus begin by telling cautionary tales that raise the stakes and create a sense of urgency in their hearers. Paul tells the story of our spiritual ancestors, the Israelites, wandering in the desert. Some of the Israelites lost sight of their glorious goal, the Promised Land, and got stuck in the day-to-day discomfort of their lives. Some of them complained and grumbled and failed to trust God, and they were struck down in the wilderness. These people had made it out of Egypt, and through the Red Sea, they ate miraculous water and manna in the desert, but they never reached the Promised Land. Paul's story is meant to jolt his listeners out of their complacency. We may think that we have time to waste and license to complain. We may think that we're doing well enough and that our daily pattern of negativity doesn't matter. But we are God's children, and our attitudes have consequences. And instead of standing around procrastinating and complaining, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. We need to run our race steadily and faithfully. We need to remember God's promises to us. We need to pursue these promises with all the strength that we have, or else. Jesus' cautionary tale hits a little closer to home. It's a story about the tower that fell in Jerusalem. Jesus tells us that 18 people were killed when they were crushed by the falling tower, and he asks us, do we think that we're better than those people who died in the accident? Is there some special reason we feel like our time won't be cut short? He says, don't get too comfortable. We're no more special than those people. We have no idea what the future holds. And every minute matters because every minute we are at the mercy of the unpredictable world. Do we want to spend our days in fear and aimlessness, or do we want to spend them in faith and fruitfulness? There's a reason that the word deadline contains the word dead. The stories that Paul and Jesus tell put our daily walk into the context of our ultimate end. They are about the ultimate finality of our lives, the high stakes of our Christian faith, and the seriousness of our choices. They remind us that what we do matters a lot, more than we can fully know. But thankfully, Paul and Jesus don't end by telling us about the deadline of death. They use it to get our attention, but then they give us a very different message. A message about life. They throw us a lifeline that we can cling to and use to pull ourselves to safety. Paul offers us a lifeline in the form of a promise. It's a mantra to take with us as we head into midterms or writing deadlines, or the demands of relationships or the workplace, the stresses of coping with illness or loss or any other part of our struggle. God is faithful, Paul tells us. God is faithful, and God will not let you be tested beyond your strength. With the testing, God will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. We may be tested up to the limit. We may reach the end of our abilities, but God is faithful. God is able. And Jesus throws us an equally sturdy lifeline, a lifeline in the form of a parable. It's maybe my favorite parable ever. It's a story about a fig tree. This fig tree had gone for 3 long years without bearing any fruit. Every year, the owner of the tree had walked to the vineyard looking for a nice fresh fig. And every year, the tree sat paralyzed and unproductive, maybe making some leaves and flowers, but failing to actually do its job, which was to make figs. And finally, the owner of the vineyard said to the gardener, "Enough already. This fig tree is a waste of space. It's time to cut it down." But the gardener said, "Just give me 1 more year. I'm going to try to help the tree out a little. I'm going to dig around it, put some fertilizer in the soil, make sure it has everything it needs. And at the end of the year, if it bears fruit, all is well. And if it doesn't, go ahead and chop it down." There are many things I love about this story, but the thing that I love most about it is the gardener. In most interpretations of the story, we are the fig tree. The gardener is Jesus. And Jesus is advocating for us. We may have given up hope. We may have been looking around the vineyard for the past 3 years, staring enviously at all the other trees plastered with figs. And we may have been thinking that we would stay barren forever. And we may have been terrified when we overheard the owner of the vineyard talking, saying, "It's time to cut the tree down." We may have agreed with him. We may have thought, "Yep, this confirms what I always feared. I'm a waste of space. Go ahead and cut me down." But luckily, it's not up to us. The owner does not get the last word, and neither do we. And as we listen to the gardener, we learn that someone hasn't given up on us. Someone thinks we might have figs in our future. And luckily for us, this someone's job is to take care of us. His job is to make sure we have air and sunshine and fertilizer. He wants to give us another chance to fulfill our purpose. I also love that the gardener doesn't let us off the hook. He doesn't say, "You know what, figs are overrated. Who cares about figs? Let's forget about fruit. Let's just enjoy this tree for what it is, a bunch of bare branches." The gardener doesn't deny that figs are the tree's purpose. And I love that the gardener doesn't leave the timeline completely open-ended. He doesn't say, "Just give me 50 more years. 50 years from now, maybe we'll see a fig." No. If he'd said that, the fig tree might have gone straight from panic to procrastination and put off making figs for another 49 years. The gardener knows that figs are important. Time is of the essence, so he advocates for more time, a limited amount of time, but enough time. And then he gets busy with the plowing and the fertilizing. And this is the hope that the parable makes possible for us. The gardener's loving care and the sun and the soil can help to awaken the deep sense of purpose built into the fig tree's genes. Instead of procrastination and panic, the tree will feel a deep, sustaining energy running in its trunk, singing in its sap, budding in its branches. With trust and care and just the right amount of time, figs can happen. Jesus doesn't tell us the end of the story, but that's okay, because the story of the parable is the story of our lives. We are living our lives in the shadow of one very big deadline and many smaller ones. We may always be tempted to procrastinate and panic, but as Paul reminds us, we will never be tempted beyond what we can bear. And thanks to the loving care of Jesus, we have one more day, one more chance to bloom and grow, one more chance to turn our energy into sweetness and sustenance, one more chance to turn faith into fruit. Sisters and brothers, it's not too late, but it's time. Let's go forth and make figs. Amen.